Okay, YouTube, in this video we're going to use the sum and difference formulas to find the exact values of sine, cosine, and tangent of this angle right here, negative 165 degrees, and talk about how these formulas are actually useful in doing so. Okay, so we have the desire to go find the sine of 165 negative degrees. And in order to do this, we say that 165, we just go reference our unit circle here. We notice that 165 negative is not even on here at all. But how could we compose a negative 165 degree angle? And so let's just assume, let's say there were a positive 165. How could we compose 165 degrees using angle values that we already know the cosine and sine of, and therefore the tangent of? In this particular instance, I noticed that if I were to take maybe 120 here and add on a 45, that would be 120 plus 45 would be 165. So in this particular case, we could say negative 120, take away 45 degrees, and we would still be dealing with something where we could compose this negative 165. So for this particular instance, we're going to say, well, if I wanted to find the sine of this, we could instead do negative 120 degrees, taking away 45 degrees right here. So we shall do the same thing for our cosine of negative 165 and our tangent of negative 165 as well. So that is, the cosine of negative 165 can be written as degrees, can be written as the composition of a negative 120 degrees, again, minus a 45, two values that we're familiar with. And then we say also the same thing with our tangent here. We say tangent of a negative 165 can be interpreted as being the tangent of the difference of these two angles, negative 120 minus a 45 degree angle. Okay, so let's start with our sine up here. We say, using the sine sum and difference formula, we have sine u plus v, or sine u minus v is sine u cosine v plus or minus sine v cosine u. So I'm going to go ahead and re-scribble this first. We say sine u cosine v, and we say this has to be a minus since this is a minus, and we say sine also here and a cosine here, where our u in this particular case is this negative 120 degrees, negative 120. This will be v is 45, positive 45. And we say, okay, over here we have vu. So we say sine of 45, cosine of negative 120. Okay, so evaluating these, we're just going to use our unit circle since this is a convenient thing to be able to use in this particular case. But we say, all right, well, the sine of negative 120, if we were to rotate negative 120 degrees, it's the same as a 210 degree angle, negative 120 here. Negative 120 would be the same as positive 240. But we'd say, okay, well, the sine at negative 120 here is negative root 3 over 2. So we get negative root 3 over 2, negative root 3 halves. And then the cosine of 45, that's a very common one. We'd say is the square root of 2 over 2. And again, if we're looking at the unit circle, here's our 45, root 2 over 2. Likewise here, the sine of 45 is root 2 over 2. And the cosine of negative 120, if we rotate negative 120 degrees, the cosine is negative a half. So we would say minus root 2 over 2 times a negative a half. And we end up with this right here. We would get negative root 6 over 4 minus now a negative root 2 over 4. And adding the opposite instead, we end up with this negative root 6 plus root 2 all over 4. So here's the exact value for our sine of negative 165. So now let's scribble this together with cosine's sum and difference formula, which we know goes cosine, cosine, sine, sine. Now this, whatever this is right here, cosine's a little bit backwards. We say it's going to be a plus since this was a difference. And we say sine, sine. Okay, so now plugging in our u and v respectively, actually in this case, we say negative 120 degrees and 45 degrees. Negative 120 and 45. We'll go ahead and evaluate for these. These are values that we already found up top here, so this is not something we have to go and do a lot of digging for right here. We say this times this plus this times this, where the cosine of negative 120 up here was this negative a half. So we get negative a half. Cosine of 45 is root 2 over 2. Sine of negative 120, here we found sine of negative 120 to be negative root 3 over 2. So negative root 3 over 2, and then this would be root 2 over 2. So in this particular instance, we get negative root 2 over 4, and this will be minus root 6 over 4. So our exact value this time is negative root 2 minus root 6 all over 4. And I just want to point this out, that is different from what you got right here. No pun intended, there's a difference. And then last but not least, we say, well, we have our u and our v down here for our tangent expression. Now the tangent expression, using our sum and difference formula for tangent, we say rewriting this would be something where we'd have the tangent of u, in this case, minus the tangent of b. You set up my desk.
Okay.
Thanks. Over 1 plus the product of tan u, tan b. And we'll go ahead and plug these values in here. So we say negative 120 for our u and 45 for b. Negative 120 degrees here, and then 45 for our b. We're going to have to go think about these, but let's pull out our unit circle. We could say these tangents of 45, those are a little bit easier to determine. Those are 1. Okay, I can't draw on that picture, apologize. But those are equal to 1. Now, negative 120 degrees, if we rotate 120 this way, I notice that it has a 60-degree reference angle. So those are going to be radical 3, and since we are finding the tangent of negative 120, and that terminates in the third quadrant, we'd get a negative divided by a negative as a positive. So let's go ahead and evaluate for these here. We'd have positive radical 3 minus root 2, oh, not root 2 over 2, sorry, minus 1. And this is all over 1 plus now. This times this, where we have tangent of negative 120 again is root 3. And then this would be times the tangent of 45, which is 1. So simplifying this, we get root 3 minus 1 over 1 plus root 3, which is not a simplifiable expression, but is the exact value for that thing. Cheers.